All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, it's our Overthinking Wheel of Time episode, and we will tie that in to what we did on when this last time, the last episode, where we talked about connectedness and people coming together. And I wanted to kind of take it in a direction of social misconceptions. Like, so we talked about schema last time, and schema is your brain creating as it sounds, a scheme, an idea of what the world should be, which is very beneficial. Because if we just saw light rays and wavelengths and everything around us, we would be so overloaded all the time that we would never evolve. But we are very good at saying, oh, that thing over there is a blueberry. That's edible. I can eat it. But also, like a schema, if you said, draw a house, most people would draw something similar. It would be a box with a triangle top and maybe a chimney and a door and some windows because we have a schema of what is house. And this is actually where a lot of highly autistic people have trouble. They can't think outside of the specific object. If you've ever heard of Temple Grandin, she's super autist, but at the same time does all these incredible things. But in talking with her, she's been interviewed and she said, I can't, if you said, look at it, think of a church, I have to think of a specific church. So I don't have this idea of church. I have to think of a specific church. And it hopefully is the last one I saw. Otherwise, I would be saying, which one? That kind of stuff. So that's why they come across a little weird because they can't process this the same way you do. And that's the thing. You can't expect everybody to think the way you do. So if she can't have a schema of church, then you have to be more specific. And that's not her problem. So it's so
Which
we do
this
that. Yeah.
this should be familiar to anyone who's listened to us yell at the clouds, because basically what you're talking about here is the more general concept of the specific that we hammer at a lot because we talk relationships a lot, which is cross-sex mind reading, which is this comes up when it comes to social misconceptions, is because we tend to mind read
Hmm.
based on our own conceptions.
Yeah, that's where cross-sex mind reading comes in because I am a man. I am an adult human female, or excuse me, adult human male, and Freudian slip. I don't know. Maybe who
You
knows?
can be
But
whoever you want. It's a brave
I
new
am the
world.
left-leaning one of us. Maybe I'm the girly one, but no, I am a man. So when I'm talking to a woman who has lived her whole life as a woman, and I expect things to look the same through her eyes, then I'm making the mistake of cross-sex mind reading. So that's where a lot of hangups come in. And it's you don't have to know what they're thinking to understand that they're thinking something different than you're thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and that bridges the gap right there. As long as there's the understanding, you spend the 2 seconds it takes to bridge the gap with words and language. But the reason I bring that up is because our ideologies can become schema. If you are, say, Mormon, everything about your life is going to be looked at through that lens. So the words I say are going to be different than if you were Catholic, or if you were Muslim, or if you were a Buddhist. My exact same words. Some things are objective, but some things have a lot of gray area in between. The information in what we say, there is a million times more exformation, which is the stuff that is between the lines. And if you have an ideology, then your world will be framed that way. So when we start talking about the good people versus bad people thing, and what brought this to the front of my mind, and we'll have some Wheel of Time examples here in a little bit, is I was at a concert this week, and it was a metal concert in this moment for those that know the band and Dayseeker and a couple other bands that I didn't know. Uh, but a lot of conservative people on the right would see that concert and say, "Oh my gosh, the devil is in the building. You're, you're horrible people. You're exactly what is the rot of society here." But in the middle of her concert, she stopped and gave a speech about unity. And it was pretty basic. It was Isn't it wonderful that we're all in here together and we don't even know each other, but we're all enjoying something great? And then she had everybody in the audience. She said, anybody who served in the military, raise your hands right now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. These are our brothers. These are the people that keep us safe. And then she went on with her concert. Well, she introduced her band after that and then went on with her concert. And I was like, that was the most unifying message I've heard from a celebrity in the last 5 years. It wasn't a canned, I'm going out there, we should have unity, but now I'm going to dog the other side. It was just, hey, this is awesome. Let's rock. And that was the people that would judge that would completely miss that just because they saw the surface, because of ideology, because of the schema they have in their head.
Oh, I was trying to keep it more positive, but it's hard not to think these last couple of weeks about what we've been talking about, which is this is why I think the radical leftists have so shot themselves in the foot, pun kind of intended darkly, with the shooting of Charlie Kirk. Because as a lot of people have said, and I mentioned last time, is normies who might have heard the name but don't really know who he is are going to be seeing their friends and family talking about what an awful monster he was and how he had it coming, and then they're going to go and they're going to see, and it's just a guy talking to college kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's he he took he took the ideal of the example of, how do I phrase this? So one of the big problems I have with modern Christianity is, as as Steve Dace puts it, they're trying to be nicer than God.
Mm.
Mercy triumphs over judgment. I can't remember what verse that is. Mercy triumphs over judgment. It doesn't replace judgment. Judgment is still there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So a while back, I talked about the woman caught in adultery. I talked about that verse and what it meant and what it doesn't mean. And the big thing that too many people who abuse that verse miss is the go and sin no more part. And Charlie Kirk went to where, in his mind, the sinners were. But he didn't hate them. He wasn't rude to them. He wasn't castigating them. In fact, you played a clip of a Trumpian supporter who was brazenly anti-gay, saying, "How dare you consort with these people?"
Mm-hmm.
And Kirk rebuked him. He said, "Look, I can tell them I don't agree with your life. I think your life is wrong. I think it is a sin, and I think you need to find Jesus. And I can still love them, and I
Mm-hmm.
can still be their friend. Friend." There
But
was a
isn't I don't know which precedes which, that one or the other one. I should have had up, where he's talking to a young gentleman who says, "I am a gay conservative, and where can I find a place in your movement?" And he said, "Right here. There's you shouldn't even list yourself as a gay conservative. You should just say I'm conservative in my values. I don't agree
mm-hmm,
with what you do in
mm-hmm,
your personal life, but at the same time, if you believe in closed borders and da 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 da," and he rattled off a lot of other
yeah.
platform issues, and
The,
he says this is where you belong, and why, you don't even have to qualify it. That's how you belong in here. You don't qualify it. You
it's
leave your bedroom life to yourself.
to the point you were making. It's the difference between having ideals, principles, and
Hmm.
being an ideologue.
Because
He
ideals
wasn't
are
an
isomorphic.
ideologue. It, so he had principles, and hey,
Hmm.
we can disagree on the details, but we agree broadly speaking on these principles. There was
Hmm.
another one that came up when that I thought of when you shared that one, with the where he rebukes the guy who's being pretty blatantly homophobic, where somebody came up, a young man came up and said, "I'm non-binary," and a big chunk of the crowd, the MAGA crowd, booed. And Kirk said, "Hey, no, 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 we don't do that. Let the person say he came up to speak. Let him speak. That's what this is all about. And he rebuked the people that were booing and heckling the guy and said, "No, let this person say their piece."
Hmm. Now, tying this to the Wheel of Time, my first uh, blatant example is I said would bring Matt into it, but it just came up naturally this time. Is he is probably one of the most open-minded people in the
Yeah.
books, but he still had traditional values
Mm.
and he still had ideas about the world based on where he grew up. And he also had ideas on the Shanshan based on how his first experiences were with them.
Yeah.
But he still was receptive to Tuan. And you see in his own thoughts in his own head of how he had to combat the ideas he had about her being Shanshan, about her being royalty, which is another thing he was
Yeah.
averse to. He had an aversion to royalty like I do to feet. I do not like feet.
I don't
I'm the
understand
opposite
that
of a
fetish
foot
at all.
fetish.
That's
Yeah,
yeah,
I
it's
am
very
the opposite. I wear socks all the time. I don't even like my own feet. But yeah, that's the way he was with royalty. And then he had bad experiences with the Shanshan. And then even his lusty experience with royalty before that was not the greatest experience,
no.
even though he thought back on it kindly. But so he had to open himself up to that and actually cognitively overcome those biases he had
Well,
in his head.
this connects to what we were talking about last time, which is connection. The reason he could do that is yes, it's a fantasy setting and he knew he was fated to marry Tawan, but
Well, that made him fight it even harder, though, because he
initially
doesn't
that
like
made
being
him
told
find it
what to do
harder.
either. He has a
Exactly.
bias against that.
Exactly. But then he decided, all right, if I'm fated to marry this person, I'd better get to know who she is.
Hmm.
And he got to know her. He connected with her. He saw, oh, I don't like a lot of the things you do, but the more I understand why you do them and what you think, the more I understand you're actually a really good person. You don't always do good things in
Hmm.
my estimation, but you're actually a really good person. And had he not connected with the human being behind the title, behind the schema, behind the ideology, he never would have realized that. And he
Hmm.
never would have found what really is his soulmate. We talked a lot back when we were talking relationships. We talked about Matt and Tawan, and even before as we were reading through, and we talked about how they need each other. Both of them have big blind spots, and they need each other, and they really complete each other.
Hmm.
It was one of the reasons we were so frustrated with how badly Sanderson mangled Matt in A Gathering Storm because of how beautifully RJ finished things off in Knife of Dreams.
Mm.
And that made the the contrast so much more stark. I eventually he kind of found his footing and he did an okay job, but it really is through Knife of Dreams, Crossroads and Knife of Dreams. Really, um, we kind of talked about this a little bit as we were reading through. Crossroads was kind of meh for us when it first came out. I remember because Winter's Heart was so good and
Hmm.
Crossroads was just so much setup. But the one thing that did stand out with Crossroads was Matt and Tawan. That's where things started to get going with Matt and Tawan, and you're like, "Oh, this is interesting. What's going on here?"
Hmm.
And it is because of that. It is because Matt's openness and his willingness to say, I'm pretty apprehensive about you and about this situation, but I'm going to put myself out there to get to know you.
Hmm. Well, and we see that in the way he was a general too, because he wasn't. That's I've brought up that he was paralleled a lot to Ulysses S. Grant, and one of the things that separated Grant from other generals was that he didn't try to force where the battle was.
Mm.
He just looked at what was around him and said, "Okay, how do we make this work?" And Matt looked at the situation as like, "Okay, I've tried to tempt fate as many times as I could, and apparently I can't. So how do I make this work?" And
I think it was Sherman who said about Grant that he had 3 in the morning courage. You've heard this in I think Hillary tried to do this in the election of who who do you want getting that 3 a.m. phone call of you
Mm,
when you get the phone call at 3 a.m. it's never good. And yet you could, I think it was Sherman who said you could wake Grant up at 3 a.m. and tell him that his left flank has just been turned and he would be just as cool as the other side of the pillow. He wouldn't panic. He would just go to work.
mm.
And that is really, you see from the beginning in Fires of Heaven when Matt starts to general, as much as he gripes and complains in his own head, he acts cool and calm and collected.
Hmm.
He acts in the situation. He is living in the moment.
Well, even in the battle, he's trying to escape the whole time.
Yeah.
You can get those moments where he's like, "Oh, those pikemen are in trouble. Okay, here's what we can do. I'll stick around a little bit longer." And
Well, yeah, I love that moment. It is so Matt because he shouts the orders and lowers his lance and leads the charge, and then like the last line of that scene is his thought in his head of what the bloody goat swallop am I doing here?
hmm
It's but he's still charging.
hmm
Um,
But then we have the inverse of that with Rand when he was in his downward spiral
mm.
because he was trying to force the world into what he wanted it to be, what he thought he needed it, what way he thought it needed to be.
Well, speaking of, I asked my son because he's reading it fresh for the first time right now, and I told him what we were going to be talking about, and I said, well, as a first time reader currently he's at the end of Path of Daggers right now, and I asked him, what are his thoughts on social misconceptions and examples and scenes from the Wheel of Time, and he said every other page in those books are about different cultures with their own standards, applying those standards to people from other ones and getting
Hmm
confused when they don't fit. In the
hmm
battle against the Sanshin, we got to see from the perspective of one of the Karhinan lords, and that was pretty much the whole thing. And I don't remember which nobleman this was, but I remember the scene he's talking about. And he says he thought everyone else was ungainly and too tall. He thought anyone wearing any color was garish, and he assumed everyone was trying to play the great game in his specific way instead of their own way.
hmm Yeah.
And that is a great example of a microcosm that encompasses the whole, because that is so much of what the story is about. um Really, even back to the specific example we harp on all the time of the cross-sex mind reading, so much of the basis, the foundation of the story with the taint on Sidon is about the battle of the sexes, when I think RJ is telling us in a pretty subtle and sometimes not so subtle way, it shouldn't be a battle, guys.
hmm
And you see that when they actually start to bond each other, when they actually start to work with each other, those few that are outside of the system. And isn't it interesting that the ones who start to do it are outside of the system?
Well, and
You know,
that's why we see a lot of these epic kind of hero tales involve younger adults
mm-hmm,
because, or even in the case of the Hobbit, he was younger for a Hobbit, but also he was outside of the world.
mm,
They were isolated. They were in their own world, just doing their own thing, and he had to go out into the big wide world and do it because that naivety plus some genius creates innovation. And yeah, they have to be special people, but they have to also be somewhat naive. They have to not be locked into schema.
well, speaking of someone who is locked into schema but then gets broken down, the example I thought of when you were talking about this, one of the, for whatever reason, one of the first scenes to pop into my head was here in Gathering Storm, which I don't know why I showed the cover because this one's pretty awful. Uh, the Rand with his raised gimpy fist. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm a terrible artist, and I think I could draw better than a better fist than that. But so this is chapter 26, A Crack in the Stone. This is when Avienda is doing the basically the Datsang punishments. because the wise ones are trying to force her into standing up for herself, basically.
Hmm.
So as you know, to set the scene and remind you of what's going on here. But in rereading this scene, I thought, you know what? This is even this is better than I remembered it. So kudos to both the character and the writers for very subtly, perhaps too subtly, but I would rather too subtle than too obvious
Mm.
of leading showing you her thought process so that she eventually gets to the point where she understands, she comes to the understanding, oh, tradition for the sake of tradition isn't good,
Hmm.
which is important to the character and to the plot because she
I'm
wouldn't have been
trying.
able to do what she did in Ruhadin if she hadn't had that realization.
I am trying to remember who said this off the top of my head, but it was on Modern Wisdom. But someone said to him, "Tradition is peer pressure from those your relatives, from your distant relatives. Tradition is peer pressure from your distant relatives." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's so good."
Which sometimes peer pressure is good. You know, the old adage of if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you? Well,
Hmm.
okay, but if your friend said, "Hey, don't jump off the bridge," that's good peer pressure.
Hmm.
Hey, don't do that thing that you shouldn't do. Hey, do this thing that you should do.
Well, and
It can be positive.
a lot of traditional views on sex were, I mean, quite useful before birth control. I mean, realistically, right? It's a lot of shotgun weddings in the past. There are not many shotgun weddings these days.
Mhm. Um, where do I want to start? Okay, so this is really interesting to me because it opens up with her being very judgmental and snarky about all the wetlanders as they're getting ready to break camp here. Um, and this is from her point of view. However, compared to the Aiel, the other wetlanders, those who weren't actual soldiers, were a mess. Camp women skittered this way and that, as if sure they would leave some task undone or some item unpacked. The messenger boys ran with their friends, trying to look busy so that they wouldn't have to do anything. The civilians' tents and equipments were only slowly being packed and stowed, and they would need horses, wagons, and teams of drivers to get them all where they were needed to go. Avienda shook her head. The eel brought only what they could carry, and their war band included only soldiers and wise ones. And when more than just spears were required for an extended campaign, all workers and craftspeople knew how to prepare themselves for departure with speed and efficiency. There was honor in that. Honor which demanded that each person be able to care for themselves and their own, not slowing the clan down. She shook her head, turning back to her task. The only ones who truly lacked honor on a day like this were those who did not work. She dipped a finger into the pail of water on the ground in front of her, then raised her hand and let it hover over a second pail. A drop of water dripped free. She moved her hand and did it again. It didn't really dawn on me until I was rereading this section that this surely isn't what the wise ones intended. This is just their method of the final test, so to speak, for
Hmm.
an apprentice wise one. But because of the situation, I think this is part of what helps Avienda break from tradition for tradition's sake. Because she's sitting here looking at everyone, all the wetlanders running around, being honorless, while she's doing something incredibly shameful.
Hmm.
And then she goes on to think that while she is doing this honorless thing, she has this kind of moment of, well, at least I'm not as bad as those people, but then kind of realize, hey, dummy, look what you're doing. Because she kind of snarkily thinks all these wetlanders probably think this is easy because they're lazy. They would rather do this than move rocks, but moving rocks accomplishes something. And she's not allowed to do anything meaningful. She says, uh, to them, it would have been barely a punishment at all. That was because wetlanders were often lazy. They would rather dip water into pails than carry rocks. Carrying rocks, however, involved activity, and activity was good for the mind and the body. Moving water was meaningless, useless. It didn't allow her to stretch her legs or work her muscles, and she did it while the rest of the camp gathered tents for the march. That made the punishment 10 times as shameful. She earned tow for every moment she did not help, and there was not a thing she could do about it. It made her angry. Then her anger made her ashamed, blah, 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 and then, and so on and so on. And she's getting into this interesting cycle where she could have gone down into a negativity spiral,
Hmm.
but because of what she had been through and because of her strength of character, she is able to use that negativity to actually break out from it and say, hold on a minute,
Hmm.
this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and that's a great example to bring in because I'm thinking of all the examples. And when I started thinking of all the examples, it just kind of hit me that the entire 14 book series, the main theme was break out of this rigid thinking.
Mm,
The disagreements you had, the adjusting to getting out of the village, the reason why the humans couldn't unite against Trollocs. I mean, you have this thing that's not even a human as your mortal enemy. Murdral, Trollocs, Drekar, all of these shadow spawn, and you can't even unite to fight it because everybody is in their world, in their culture, in their and I think that was Jordan's main theme for everything because we saw it in the little things with relationships and then we saw it in the big things with like you just brought up the Aiel versus the Wetlanders versus even in the last battle no one could unite. That was supposed to be Elaine's defining moment was uniting everybody and it was just kind of meh because everybody still fought each other. They still
mm,
wanted to do things their way. And I think that was the main theme of the whole entire series was let go a little bit. And we saw it with Rand and Tam, where Tam was teaching Rand to let go in the final moments. And the the irony here is he did it using the main protagonist or antagonist, excuse me, as the Dark One, who is the one saying we need to break the scheme that is the world. So it's actually like, oh, you actually have to embrace the Dark One to some degree in order to save the world from the Dark One.
so that just made me think of another scene because sticking with Avienda as our example here is remember back in Fires of Heaven when Rand asks Lan, how do the Aiel fight? And he points out, well, here's a tactic they favor, and here's how you counter it. And Avienda scoffs and says, what would a wetlander know? And Rourke slaps her down and says, the wetlanders know how to fight, and this is a tactic that the Shinarans in particular have used, and it has worked. So Avienda knows the the wetlanders, they do things differently, but they're still capable.
Hmm.
She's seen it firsthand. On a more meta scale, she's seen it firsthand. She knows that the wetlanders are capable. They just have a different way of doing things. But what's interesting, and the other thought I had as I was rereading this section of kudos to the authors for doing this, is it's one thing to know something intellectually and know it generally. And this is something that I struggled with and was really annoying to me because I hate it, but it's true. Is so my when I way back when I tried to get a blog going, and my handle on X is Mr. Nobody, because my thinking was it shouldn't matter who I am. It shouldn't matter who you are. What matters are your ideas. Okay, well, yeah, except we're people and people have biases and people have preferences and
Hmm.
people have connections. So what happens a half page later as Avienda is thinking these thoughts? Min walks up and talks to her, and it annoys her. But she realizes I can't get mad. My first sister Elaine wants Min to also be my our first sister. We share Rand. I have to control my temper. I have to be patient. And in the exchange between them, she kind of starts to realize she's not belittling me. She's not insulting me. She's not, demeaning my honor. She's just different, but she means well. And especially over what the crux of their conversation is this is when Rand is going down his dark spiral.
Hmm.
This is after he has embraced the true power. This is where things are getting really bad, and Min is very concerned. And Avienda is of the mind of, I can't help him until I help myself. But she respects that Min cares as much as she does.
Hmm.
She respects that even though she has a different way of doing it, even though, you know, she has a different personality, different mannerisms, Min is very much like a female Matt in a
Hmm.
lot of ways, in her humor and in how flippant she is, and how she feigns aloofness at times, but she actually does really care.
Hmm.
And Avienda realizes that and goes, huh, maybe there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah, I'll give a good real life example for that. And one of the great things about going back to school is I am exposed to a lot of different cultures
Mm,
in college versus going walking around the street here, uh, or even just being in your own bubble. Because I mean, I bring in clients and stuff, but you attract. It's never going to change DEI people that you're going to attract people similar to you. Whether it's your attitude, whether it's the way you look, whether it's how you present yourself, any of those things, you're going to attract similarity. So I am forced to be in similar, just diverse situations, right? Meditation. We all think of Buddhism, right? We think of Buddhism, breath work, prayer is meditation. The
mm,
rosary is meditation. Uh, Islamic prayer is actually designed as a meditative practice 3 or 4 times a day. And all of these things, and then they're studying all of these things and they're having similar effects. So that is a great example of a bunch of cultures figuring out the exact same thing in different ways. And pie is another example. Three cultures discovered pie about the same time. And we all know the Greeks did it. What were the other two, Heath? You know?
apple and sweet potato.
3.14, blah, 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 blah,
That is
blah.
the first thing I thought of when you said it
Nope.
because I'm
Pi,
hungry.
the number pi.
Yeah.
Using pi to actually make sense of the circumference and area of a circle. Uh, the Greeks did it.
I think the Chinese were
The
the other ones that
Chinese,
were kind
yes.
of uh, uh,
Mhm.
co-discovery.
And one
And
other.
one of the Native Americans, I don't remember which one.
I believe it was the Mayans. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah, it
remember if
was
it
one
was
of
the
the Native
Mayans.
Americans. It was either the
Yeah.
Mayans or the Incans, but all three exactly at the same time separately. Now that makes some people like what's his face with the ancient civilizations or
Graham Hancock.
Graham Hancock say
Yeah.
that, oh, it was the lost city of Atlantis people that went out everywhere. But no, it's just geniuses are everywhere. They just did it differently. In fact, the Greeks might have been the most inefficient version of it because they basically made triangles inside the circle until it was infinite number of triangles until they could you come up with the right number. So it was very inefficient. But uh, but yeah, things that transcend beyond cultures independently actually lead to strength in the argument. That's how, when someone discovers a scientific discovery that you discovered independently, that actually should make you happy because now we're on a right track and we should be working with that person instead of being a rival with that person. You sent me this book and we're going to talk about it once I can read more of it. Although I have read some of this person's work before, so I do have an idea what he believes. But for those that are just watching, it's Darwin's Black Box, and the premise of it is intelligent design versus evolution, and a lot of the arguments in there, if it's what I've seen before, if two people lived at the same time, Darwin and Gregor Mendel. If the
Mhm.
internet existed then, a lot of Darwin's ideas would have been modified on the spot. Some of the holes that the people find in his arguments would have been modified as if soon as he learned what Gregor Mendel had discovered with his peas. So yeah. So this is how the world works, and we just keep going, man.
It, it is what should be the great, and if we're going to try and stay optimistic here, I think there are certainly people trying to do this, that the boon of the internet is we've got someone literally half the world away in Russia who watches and comments and shares his thoughts from his perspective, his culture, his history, and there are similarities there. There are differences, and we are able to have an exchange. And we can do that without saying we're right, you're wrong, our way is better, yours is, hey, that's interesting. I
Mhm.
hadn't thought of that before. I hadn't thought of that way before. And that that doesn't mean that, you know, I'm this takes me back to several weeks ago when we talked about immigration and different cultures and the reason, you know, one of the big reasons the MAGA movement is so focused on legal and illegal immigration, and you're seeing it blowing up in Britain now too, is not all cultures are compatible. The example I gave when I talked about this several weeks ago was there are plenty of places I would love to visit. You know, ideals are isomorphic. Hey, out there, I would love to visit you sometime, or you can come visit us in Texas. That would be awesome. I don't want to live there because I'm American. I'm more than American. I'm Texan.
Mhm.
Get on my Texas Ranger shirt because today's the last day, so I'm already getting ready for next season, which is hopefully doesn't suck as much. Is if you don't want to be part of that culture, then why are you moving to that place? If you want to go
Mhm.
visit it, if you want to go learn from it, if you want to go see, that's cool. I'm So one of the ways I unwind at night is I try and find things like travel or nature or food shows, because they kind of help me unwind. They engage my mind just enough, but not so much that it's excitable. And so it helps me unwind. And it's something I don't mind turning off in the middle of. Whereas if you're watching like a drama or something, you're kind of getting engrossed in the story and you don't want to turn it off in the middle. Can't stop in the middle, it stings. And there's this series on Netflix called something or other Rhapsody, and it's a Korean travel slash cooking show where they look at a particular element of Korean cuisine, and they look at the history of it and the culture of it and the different variations in the different areas. And so the one I was watching last night was on soju, which you would love. And where
It's alcohol,
soju
right?
yep,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it is kind of their version of vodka ish. But it's their own twist on it. It's their own way of making it, and they go into the culture and
Is it like a
why
rice
do it
vodka?
that way. So basically, they take a fermented substance, which so like something like makgeolli, which they call rice wine, but it's more like rice beer because it's
Mm.
fermented, and then they distill that to get the ethanol out. So they start with a fermentation process and then they distill the fermented product.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's how we do it. I
Yeah.
mean, I mean,
So
we allegedly, uh,
allegedly, theoretically,
allegedly. No, but I mean, if you distill wine, you have schnapps. If you distill beer, you have whiskey. That's that's basically how it works. I mean, it's all
yeah.
moonshine before you do some other things to it, but
And then
uh,
they have different reasons, different regional variations, different historical reasons for why this is that way and that's that way, and they use different things, and it's cool and interesting. And it's like, I'd love to try these things. I'm going to have my favorite thing. And I'm probably going to say, I'm just going to stick with my Ukrainian vodka because I like it and it's my thing. But it was nice to try these things. When I was there, I tried some various things, and it is good to have that exposure because you don't know what you don't know.
Hmm.
And the way out of rigid mental thinking is to see how other people do it.
Hmm.
Back to the example of Avienda is it you can see in that chapter, you can see the cracks starting to form, but they're very small until Min Farshaw shows up
Hmm.
and it becomes personalized. It's not just the general idea of, hey, this is how these people do things. This is how these people in general over here think. It's this person who I know and who I'm trying to befriend. One of the last days I was there, I was looking around for a liquor store or a bar or whatever because I wanted to try something local. I wanted to try something that I could only get there in South Korea, and I just happened to find because I walked past this American style bar. It was a whiskey bar. It's like, oh, we're a whiskey bar because we basically cater to. Luckily, the guy spoke really good English. We basically cater to South Koreans who want Western whiskey, and he said, I know a place where he makes his own makgeolli, which is the rice beer. He
Hmm.
makes his own. It's really good. Go here. It was literally half a block from the hotel I was in, but I just hadn't gone down that side street, so I'd never seen it. I was like, son of a gun. So I went there, and the guy was so nice, and he's like, hey, you want to go back into the distillery? I'm like, yeah. And he took
Twist
me
my
back
arm
in.
harder. Yeah.
Yeah, he showed me the process. He showed me how he did it. He's like, here's all the dates because I know, these are how the batches cycle through and all this, and this is how I get the different flavors because he basically had four different flavors, one for each season is how he did it. And I'm like, this is awesome. I'm not going to do this at home, but it's cool to see how you do it.
Hmm. I ran into last night. I was out doing business over drinks, which is dangerous, but it does good business. And I ran into yet another Brit that reinforced something I have noticed over the last several years. Brits love Texans and they hate Americans. We are not the same as the rest of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is Europe. Yeah, a lot of Europeans in general, they love Texans, even if they hate Americans. And there is something special about that, where we're actually like, oh, because our culture is this way, in this way that you love. And there's nothing wrong with embracing that. The problem is if you get locked into it,
Mm-hmm.
because there are things that we probably do that we need to give up a little bit on. You know, we're pretty stubborn. You know, maybe we need to be a little less stubborn. That's fine. But the thing about Texans are we're actually quite diverse compared to the rest of the country, and people don't realize that because you
Mm-hmm.
get messages from Hollywood. But we have everybody living the same life in different ways here in Texas, and that has created the true melting pot of the United States. And when that comes across in your personality and you meet people, they love it because you're just a cool dude. You lose judgment living in Texas, really. It's not like the deep South where it's bless your heart all the time, right? You lose a lot of judgment because you have to accept real life. The weather here is harsh, whether it's hurricanes, freezes, tornadoes, we even have earthquakes here. People don't realize that. And it's just like the nature of this area is kind of harsh. And if you don't come together, you die. And that mentality bled up through the genetics because those are the people who survived. And and people don't realize that. until you actually meet people from around the world and like, oh, you're from Texas, awesome. If I had been from like fucking, excuse me, pardon my French there. If I had been from like Georgia, they would have been like, oh, okay, you're from the South, and they would have already judged me based on that. So, just my 2 cents. We kind of went afield a little bit.
Well, I think it all still connects to
Well, what ideas of things? If you're judging somebody from where they're from, you have an idea of them, right? And there's some survival ability from that, right?
yeah.
It's like looking at the dark alley, I shouldn't walk down there, right? If if you know somebody is from a certain area, there is going to be a high probability they're going to have values from that area.
Probability is what I was so the
Yeah.
example I've used this example before, but the highway that that ran through the small town where we went to high school is once you got into San Antonio, you did not want to stay on that highway because that highway
Was the border, was
became
the
the
border.
dividing line
Yeah.
between the Hispanic gangs and the black gangs.
Mhm.
And so if you
More
were a
specifically, the Bloods and the Crips.
yep. So
Yeah.
if you were a cop working that area and you had a dead body of this race wearing these colors, well, you know, you are probably looking for someone of this race wearing these colors affiliated with this gang. Probably. There's nothing wrong with that inherently. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. You're just playing the probabilities. But if you get rigid mental thinking, is what we've been harping on here for weeks. If you get rigidly locked into it must be, and then it turns out, oh, it was just a jealous girlfriend, and you've completely blown the
Or
case.
or even an inside job in that gang and trying to
Ex-
pin it on the
yeah,
other gang. Yeah.
exactly. So you can think this is probably what this person is like. This is probably what this place is like. But don't get locked into thinking this must be what it's like. Back to our Wheel of Time examples. That's basically the difference between Fires of Heaven Avienda and Gathering Storm Avienda.
Hmm.
Is when Rourke slaps her down for being um, small-minded and narrow-focused when she belittles Lan, like you think Lan doesn't know what he's talking about?
Hmm.
Seriously? The guy that has his own nickname in Aiel because he's so freaking famous, and you're going to tell him he doesn't know what he's talking about? You're the one in the wrong here, honey.
Yeah,
And you
and you
need
can
to
make that
broaden your
general. You
mind.
can make these generalizations like, okay, so the concert I was just at. Uh, does the per just if you just pointed at somebody going there and said, "Do they have tattoos?" You could probably say yes and be right, because there were probably more tattoos in that room than there are in the whole city I live in, the whole suburban city I live in. Uh, but yet I was in that room and I have zero tattoos.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, probability. If you just said, "Oh, random person going in there, do they have tattoos?" and you can't look at them, you'd say yes, and you'd probably win your money. You'd get some house money on that. But if it happened to be me, you'd lose it. So that's the thing about probabilities versus guarantees, and you have to look at the whole situation, which would mean, I guess, stripping me down to nothing to tell you I had no tattoos, but you have to pay for that.
Yeah,
But that's a
we'll
separate
set up
channel.
we'll
That's
set up a
not that's not
paywall
on
for
YouTube.
that.
Yeah, that's not on YouTube.
Well, that's all I've got. We just have kind of a quickie today.
Yeah,
Although we
which is
didn't.
funny because it's like one of the most important topics we've talked about, but at the same time, I think we beat it. I think we beat it to death. So
Well, and hopefully we made enough sense to make someone go, you know what? Yeah, this is this is the way that I think rigidly, and I should work on
mhm.
relaxing that. You don't have to throw it away. That's the other side of you know the DEI multiculturalism where they go too far is yeah, you got to throw all that out. Well, hold on, don't throw it out. Just soften it. Just
Well, and it's okay to be
put
on
a
guard.
gate in your wall so that you can open it up and let things in.
Well, it's okay to be on guard and still open.
Mm,
to the experience, right? So I'm going to keep it non-political, non-relationship, nothing. The dark alley. The dark alley could be a shortcut for you, but you probably should take precautions
mm,
in going through there. You should probably look and see and let your eyes adjust and everything to, have your keys in your hand or whatever. And, in the occasion that it nothing happens, you had a shortcut and you made it to your vehicle safely quicker than you would have before. But you should be on guard because it is a dark alley. And that's kind of like that's a good way to go through life is I'm not going to dismiss this thing, but the probability that this thing is the way I think it is higher. So I'm going to actually kind of protect myself a little bit along the way. And you get a long way doing that,
mhm.
especially with relationships.
Oh yeah, yeah. And you never you it when it comes to relationships, especially, you never know what you're going to find
Hmm.
until you open that gate and see who's out there and say, "Oh, you know what? I should let this person in. We could hang out."
That's why I hate the term red flags because they should be caution
Mhm.
lights.
Mm.
Just be careful. Put this little brace here. Just have an exit plan if you need to. Have friends around that you can talk to. If things are going bad, so you can get rid of your own bias. Because in the beginning, you're gonna like ignore all of that. So have friends around that you can talk to and
Mm.
be like, "Hey, this is how things are going," and be honest. Don't just sugarcoat everything. Don't get rid if you have to get rid of your friends for your relationship.
Oh boy.
That's the only one I would call a red flag.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Well,
yeah.
so the first thing I thought of when you said red flags, and this will be my closing thought, is anyone who's ever been to a beach, there is a flag system for the danger level there. And there are times where it is a red flag because, oh no, that's dangerous. Do not go in the water for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And then there are other times where it's, hey, be careful because there might be an undertow. There might be a this or a that or whatever, you know. And other times it's, hey, it's nature. So right now conditions are good, but still be careful because it's nature, it's chaos. Don't get too lackadaisical. So there are levels there.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to end it. So yeah, main point of this whole Wheel of Time episode is try to find where your schema lie and just pick the obvious ones first. So this is your mental exercise. Find where your schema lie and then think of something that you might be looking at through that lens. So whether it's a relationship with somebody or how you watch the news or anything along those lines and say, okay, how does this ideology that I have affect the way I look at this? And that's a good start. I mean, because
Yeah,
awareness is always the best first step.
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we will see y'all next time. I have no idea what we're talking about on our social episode, but
There's
I
plenty
want to
going on. Plenty
I want to
going on.
stay on this topic next Wheel of Time episode because I try to keep it lighter this time, but the other thought I had about social misconceptions is darker, and I
Well,
didn't.
because sometimes you're right.
Yeah.
Sometimes
So
your negative thought is correct. Yeah.
one of the things that popped into my head when you talked about social misconceptions and how to tie that to Wheel of Time was when Eganon meets the girls in Tanchico.
Mm,
And the real life analogy I thought of was Yeonmi Park and how
that's
she
right. You did
talks
bring that up. Yeah.
about how she was brainwashed growing up in North Korea. And there's a very stark and real similarity there between those two thoughts and how those the character and the real life person were able to break free of that very rigid and very dangerous thinking.
Well, yeah, when you're ripped from your current schema, it is scary. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, remind me to tell the story of my first semester at Oklahoma State, being out of the little farming town in
Mm-hmm.
in and off in the big bad world of 270 people in a class, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it throws you off and it can change everything. You could take a perfectly book smart person and they fail a class because of just the situation changed
Yeah.
and what your idea of school was thrown on his head.
All right. Well, we'll get into that next time and we'll see y'all then.
All right, later.